Continue recording. Mm. Welcome back, Luis Del Pino. We got kicked out.
You had too much coffee this morning. All right, introduce us to Neil properly and stop blabbering around.
I don't know Neil.
Well, that's why we need to find out who the hell's coming to our super special wake up, smell the roses. You have to be a good host.
Welcome, friends.
Welcome, participants.
I am the world's worst host, and wake up and think clearly. Welcome to it, or wake up and smell the roses. Wake up and drink coffee, which I haven't. I have my own. Oh, there's two people waiting in the room. Oh,
probably
Canadian
the same
truckers.
two ones that were kicked out.
Oh. Hmm.
That's probably Joel.
Welcome,
Canadian
Canadian Truckers for Freedom.
It's probably Joel. 10-1, it's Joel.
Canadian Truckers for Freedom, anti-vaxxers.
But Luis, do you know what is the best investment? The best investment is called electric vehicles and driverless vehicles and the associated technology. So invest in that. Invest in Google. Oh, Mike is trying to join.
How you doing, Louise, by the way?
Doing good. Keeping busy and out of trouble as much as I can. I watched the movie The Planet of the Apes early this morning. It's one of those things, and it was very impacting. Very impacting. I think they should show this on CNN, The Planet of the Apes, and show us to ourselves before we all are damned to hell for being so stupid collectively and individually, because it takes a lot of stupid individuals to make a stupid collective.
Welcome, Mike.
So,
What have you learned so far?
I watched the movie this, and it's
What kind of coffee is that, Luis?
Sumatra.
Wow.
Sumatra. It's like
Want to elaborate, Louise?
it's the best coffee in the world. That's I have to say. On the movie, The Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
I feel like Taylor in that movie. Taylor is an astronaut who traveled in time and comes back to Earth a few thousand years later, and he finds that there's a new civilization in there, the apes, and of course the guy tries to get established there, to see what the hell is going on, and the civilization of the apes is very similar to our civilization, not as not so technologic, of course, but just as dogmatic in their ways, and you can see how the social structure is put together, and they have the politicians at the top, and they're supposed to be kind of philosophers / scientists. They're the intellectuals telling everybody what to do, what not to do. And of course there's the humans that devolved, that they treat like animals in zoos. And then so basically you can look at their society and look like, okay, this is us, but less technified. It makes you think. It makes you think how really stupid we are. Although we think we're very smart, but we are just.
That's an example of karma. That movie. What comes around
in any
goes
case,
around.
what's interesting?
Go ahead.
We've treated animals so badly. Now they're in 1,000 years, they're taking revenge on us. Is that the
Yeah, I don't think you
summary
have to
of
go
the
that
movie?
far, Jay. Jay, you don't have to go that far. Like we're humans. We're in a human form. Animals would be okay if we did the human thing, meaning that we take accountability to what we think is positive or negative. You know, a little bit, Louise, on that, because we classify each other because they were different
Actually-
looking, but we do it we even do it more when it comes to genders. You know, when a person says, okay, I'm a man, I'm being disrespected the color of my skin. I said, but you're still ignoring the opposite gender, let alone the children, which eventually they are genders. So that's been going on for a long time. When nations have met each other, and now in that particular movie, there's a classification. You're white, but even there was some dark-skinned people that were in a human form, and then the animals, in this case, apes. You know, that was a lot of that was a lot of analogies about what slavery was. You know, it's at that time. I think they also
Now,
promote the movie Roots too.
what
and it
we
was,
need is a planet of the cows. Planet of the cows, where cows dominate.
Why, Jay? Why?
Because we've been eating cows. So now the cows dominate, and then we're the slaves of cows, and they farm us and eat us. That would be karma.
Jay, that whole concept of slavery, that whole concept of slavery and mastery is an internal thing, not an external thing. You know, to depictuate somebody that is a slave or depictuate somebody that's a master, both of them are conditioning. It's like watching the two different pieces on the two different colors on the chessboard. I get it. You're going to bring the analogy of an animal, but this is, I don't see on any of these Zoom picture a cow, let alone a chicken. So any analogy is a cheap excuse as humans, once again, avoiding the responsibility. This is about humans. It's like saying humane way of killing animals. Fuck it. Let's talk about humans. Animals, we already know. Nature, or we already know. We're cruel to it because we're avoiding ourselves, regardless of the color of our skin. This is why when people use analogies going down the rabbit hole, do I look like a fucking rabbit? No. Then stop using cheap fucking analogies. It's like talking about the Dalai Lama. None of us are the Dalai Lama unless somebody could say, listen, I read the book. I don't give a shit who the guy wrote it. I don't give a shit what his profession is. This is the teachings I got from it. Maybe to care with other human beings. And caring doesn't necessarily mean we're going to say all pleasantries. Caring could be, listen, you're going to get another stick to the head. Wake up. Pay attention to yourself. Not me. It's of no concern to me. I'm nobody in the equation when it comes to other people. You know, talking about animals, whether or not they're being cruel and all that kind of stuff, you might as well start talking about vegetables. You might as well start talking about how we pollute the water. But the problem with us is humanity. If there's a problem, if there's a solution, it'll be humanity. Outside of that, it's an excuse. And if guys
Luis.
Yes, Mike.
I want to go back to this movie, and this is touching also on what Dominic was just talking about as well. As I understand it, the movie you were referring to was in effect saying human nature does not change. We are stuck in all sorts of traps, as it were now, and we will always continue to get stuck in those traps. Mm-hmm. That's the impression I got from what you were saying.
Yeah. The problem is, see, the movie has a very interesting twist, which I need to point out. So the guy comes back to Earth, you know, intelligent, technological, you know, just a modern man, comes back to a planet. He doesn't know where he is, but he sees a civilization that's completely upside down, where humans, or what looks like, you know, cave humans are, you know, they can't even talk. And then the apes are on top. Actually, there's a social distinction between the gorillas and the monkeys. But what they're doing is they're throwing at us our own problems. The modern man problems is right there in the society of those apes. But then at the end of the movie, there's a twist because when the guy finally establishes that he is a human being, he can talk, he's really smart and everything, and he despises the monkeys for being so dogmatic about their denial that there was a devolution of humans and that they were actually before them and that they were smarter. At the end of the movie, this is beautiful, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it for you guys because it's well worth listening to what the main guy there, the big politician, the president. He looks at the guy and he says, you don't know what I know. And he reads some kind of a verse or something that says the following. It's I'm not going to find it now. You'll see. Here it is. It says, beware the beast, man, for he is the devil's pawn. Alone among God's primates, he kills for sport, for lust, for greed. Yeah, he will murder his brother to possess his brother's land. Let him not breed in great numbers, for he will make a desert of his home and yours. Shun him. Drive him back into his jungle lair, for he is the harbinger of death. 29th scroll, 6th verse of the Planet of the Apes. So we are the problem, and we are the solution in a sense, because we are self-aware. Self-awareness is the problem and the solution. And we can get away from it. So in us, we have all the potential to be God or be the devil. It's in there. Every consciousness has the potential to go either way, backwards, forward, in a pleasant way or a very unpleasant way.
Mm-hmm. Well, then the question becomes, how do we get out of this status of being stuck in our problems?
Mm-hmm. The answer.
Now let me back up from this for a minute. I go to another philosophy group, and they've spent a lot of time talking about critical thinking. Okay? And there is this underlying assumption that people need to learn to think critically, carefully.
Yep.
And I don't see it that way.
There's
to my mind,
element.
To my mind, a far more important problem is that critical thinking is not valued. Okay? It is not considered something which is important, except to maybe a small number of people, such as the strange ones gathered here. Okay? Now let me go a little bit further. I don't really know how to get to the point where one begins to value critical thinking. But I do note that an element which is often helpful in changing attitudes is to go and paint a new story, to write a new story, to tell a new story, if you will, of how the world is or how it should be. Mm-hmm. Interesting example. Look at Uncle Tom's Cabin. Back in that time, it was a widely accepted picture that Black people were not fully human.
That's right.
A very important thing that was done by the story Uncle Tom's Cabin was it presented Black people as being fully human and worthy of consideration. Mm-hmm. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, records that at some point after the war had been fought, after the Civil War, she met a Southern gentleman who introduced himself and then, so you're the little lady who started the war.
Listen, wonderful questions, Mike. Critical thinking, we got to be cautious. We have to be very mindful of what we mean by critical and by thinking. The problem that I find every time there are two people talking to each other or more is that we say words, we use words to communicate. And unfortunately, because language is so complex, the words can mean many different things. And if we're not very careful in defining the word as we use it in that conversation, in that exchange of ideas, we go array. We just don't understand each other. So,
Luis,
yes,
that was very much the point that was made over and over again in the meetings of this other philosophy group on critical thinking.
Yes. So we have to establish a glossary of terms before we even start talking about anything. If not, we spend the time redefining words and trying to say what we mean. First, we need to agree in the terms, the definition of the terms we're using, so then we can talk about the ideas around the words. So I agree.
But how do we agree?
I would disagree.
Aha.
I would disagree.
If I can share, guys.
Because I think the first thing that we need to do, and then I'll let Dominic talk. I think the first thing that we need to do is convince people that something like critical thinking is to be valued.
But we need to define it. And then, yes, of course, I agree with you. Critical thinking is fundamental, but we need to know exactly what we mean by critical and thinking.
I think, Luis, when you define things, you also have to be able to deconstruct it. So I'll give you an example. The critical thinking that most people talk about is building. You're building on a foundation, but what is the foundation? The emotions. Most wars are fought based on emotions. Most people that philosophize, unfortunately, I've already brought in their likes and dislikes. That's the emotions. That's the foundation. That's usually the first thing. Actually, the physical is the foundation, but the emotion is the next level of awareness of building. So now what happens with a lot of people when they're doing critical thinking, they're purposely avoiding their emotions, or their emotion pokes his little head and they get into arguments and debates. That's the person that's not developed emotionally. So critical thinking comes at a point where you can actually do critical deduction, what it isn't. It's not this nor that kind of teachings. So now when people do this, they're doing the concept of, they might think they're killing care. No, they're not aware of care. Because if you truly are aware of care, you do not actually talk about care. It just is. So now when a person wants to deduct things and say, okay, well, should we bomb them? I said, well, then you're not going to go inwards. Why would you kill another human being? Would you want to be killed? Are you going to be like a samurai soldier, a samurai fighter that they understand their craft, but let me be the final blow because I understand actions and karma. So now the whole concept of, critical thinking is what Louise is talking about. Let's deconstruct it. Or in this case, let's define our meanings. That's a person that doesn't realize, well, where's my emotion in that? You should be able to get fucking pissed at humanity and say, listen, hold on a second, Luis, please. You should be able to be pissed at, but most human beings, they're neutral. It'd be nice when somebody is angry with their plight as a human within the race. But if not, most people use politeness. That's just a way of saying I'm not developed emotionally, so I'm going to be polite. Fuck politeness. There's a moment to be upset. There's a moment to be excited. Those are all different emotions. That's all they are. And they're all expressed. But unfortunately, when we do this concept of critical thinking, and no different than somebody else, Dom, I only lead with the heart. What the fuck's the heart? Are you talking about the organ? Are we talking about the blood that actually goes to it, which is your ancestors? Sorry, go ahead, Luis.
I have a brother-in-law. I have many brother-in-law because I have many sisters. And one of them says, it has an expression that's very funny. I love it. He says, I'm so pissed, I can't even think.
Mm-hmm. That's a good term. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, going back to critical thinking, but you cannot mix those two things together. You can't mix emotions and critical thinking at the same time.
What? But Dominic says that thinking is based on emotions.
Yes,
You have
it is.
this emotion.
Wait a
then
minute.
you cut-
Wait a minute.
you-
Wait a minute.
you
Yeah, I
disguise
understand. I
it with
understand. It's
thinking.
always the same thing. Consciousness, and I'm gonna say consciousness with a big C, capital C, because it's anybody's consciousness, human and some other animals or maybe plants. I don't know. But let's say consciousness is like a spider web.
Mhm.
If you look at consciousness, you look at the whole spider web. And within the spider web, you see subdivisions, little departments.
Mhm.
You have it's a big enterprise, and you have different departments in there. And one of them is feelings. One of them is sensations. One of them is emotions. And one of them is thought.
Mhm.
2 + 2 = 4 is of the realm of thought. But if you start saying that you don't feel good about 4, it gives you some kind of a thing. Actually, it pisses you off that it's not 5. Then we have a problem, because you're mixing two things that are going to they're going to derail what we call critical, reasonable
Are you saying
thought.
that critical thinking is devoid of feelings, emotions, sensations? Or is
Again,
critical thinking just using words to define those feelings, emotions, sensations?
critical thinking is an aspect of consciousness, and feelings is another aspect of consciousness. Again, you cannot break consciousness apart and go, okay, well, it's all thinking or it's all feeling. You have to see the whole picture. But in your scientific investigation of consciousness, you're going to have to look at different aspects of a thing. Just like you see a car and you know the difference between the block, the engine block, and the tires, but it's still a car. So you have to distinguish different aspects of the one thing. And I say that in the consciousness has to consider all those little aspects, study each one separately, but then put them back together. So you cannot understand consciousness only in terms of critical thinking without values, without emotions, without fairness, without social justice, without historic problems, without war and peace, and all the stuff that goes together.
Luis, can critical thinking be done without fairness, without justice? Like, can we do perfect critical thinking and be unjust, be unfair, be immoral, and it would still be valid?
I think somebody's listening to radio or something, or to the TV or something.
Mr. Trucker.
And it's garbling the conversation. Let me throw this at you guys. I like the word metaphysics. I like the word metaphysics to kind of describe critical thinking. I say that
Luis, right there. Hold on. One second. You said the word. There's the feelings. I like. That's the feeling.
Of course.
But this is where Jay's talking about it. I'll give you an example. So when you talk about the car, critical thinking, a person that's critically thinking would realize, as I'm describing that object, that actually the language I give is not on there. Most people will get caught up in their feelings. Well, Dominic, I said, you've been living your whole life not realizing critical thinking, that you don't see car. You don't see the language you've been using for 40, 50, 60 years. You don't see this. That's feelings. But if people don't question, Luis, if they don't question things like thinking, feeling, emotions, and senses, you're never going to be the observer of consciousness.
Yeah, that's what we are doing. Yeah.
No, I don't know about the we is the within yourself. So when people talk about critical thinking, they're talking about it. They're not actually being it. In this case, it's same with when people talk about teachings. If I'm a doctor, I don't talk about being a doctor. I am a doctor, meaning that I'm in the moment that I'm in, but I'm also going to wear a different mask in the next moment. So people, what they're doing, they're not actually doing critical thinking. They're doing reaction. Sure. And if they're,
you have no argument there. You have no argument there.
But again, an argument is based on a feeling that's not developed. Because Luis, I've shared this before, Luis, you cannot see through my senses. So if you know that,
I don't pretend to.
I know, but if you know that for sure, then why would anybody say the word I agree or disagree? Unless you realize you're talking about energy. What I'm sharing with people is all I'm doing. The concept of argument is like somebody says, I'm going to create a sport so we can compete with each other. I'm never competing with anybody else. But if you're looking at the rewards of winning a trophy, then you're using some sort of external things to justify. That's a person, whether they're aware of it or not, they're insecure, but yet secure enough to talk about the game that they're playing. They're not realizing they're playing in the illusion realm and the karma realm with two different things going on. Now, Luis, you say a mantra. What I'm sharing with you, if you get into the state of silence, which is called peace, you will listen from within. Only thing I'm sharing is outside, you're hearing me. That's it. And anything that comes out of your mouth to agree or disagree with me tells me you're not listening to you. Because listening to you is what? I'm purposely doing this, talking loud, purposely. This to me is a stage. But a person will say, well, Dominic, but I don't like the way you are. I said, that's revealing you. I see a hand.
We have a question from the Canadian trucker.
Oh,
Luis has something to say, actually, but go ahead.
Yes, Canadian trucker.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you're missing the main point here, in my opinion, is that you have to care before you can even bother to try to define critical thinking. So the main point is, go to philosophy meetings, go wherever you will, but there are only a small minority of people who occupy themselves with critical thinking, either in definitional, emotional, or intellectual terms. These people who I see around me in my 18-wheeler, the 500 of us who are blocking the bridge, may not be interested in critical thinking. We may be interested in shouting the words freedom, no vaccine, but we're not actually critically thinking. And the only critical thinking that has been demonstrably shown to be critical thinking over at least some millennium is mathematics. And if we can't get people to learn the rules of mathematics, even in their primitive form, I'm not sure we have much hope of becoming anything like Planet of the Apes. Thank you.
okay. Let me try to finish the answer to Mike's question, which is going to somehow add on to your comment, Joe. Critical thinking is part of consciousness. The consciousness of a human being, and what we are trying to allude to when we talk about critical thinking is unified knowledge. Unified knowledge, a whole complete packet of I know what I know. I do what I know what I do. I'm coherent within, inside and outside. That's what we're trying to, when we talk about critical thinking, we're trying to talk about unified knowledge that is coherent, that makes sense of everything. And it has to include all kinds of different thinking and feeling and emoting and affecting and relating, et cetera, et cetera. It's a complex thing. You can't simplify it. It's not simple. Critical thinking, or in I'm going to use the word that I was trying to allude to before, metaphysics. Metaphysics, I call it the science of all sciences. The science of all sciences. Metaphysics is a unified knowledge that takes the whole enchilada, looks at the whole of reality, and analyzes it from all different other sciences: physics, psychology, philosophy, sociology, economics, social welfare, vaccines against non-vaccines, nutrition, exercise, every bit of knowledge that humanity has accumulated. That's why I believe it's better to use the term metaphysics, because that science of all sciences not only sees things and the relationships between things, but it sees through things into the very essence of anything and nothing concurrently at the same time and everywhere. So that's where I would go with this. The question about critical thinking, I would call it metaphysics, metaphysical, and try to see it as a complete package of all the other sciences that humanity has perfected and accumulated over the history of our species.
What do you think, Mike, about that kind of critical thinking? Do you value it?
Well, I feel that critical thinking is a rather fuzzy term, which is still in a process of evolution. When we talk about such matters as reason, logic, mathematical logic, these are things I have a modest knowledge of. And so far as I can tell from the history of those things with which I am acquainted, those ideas are ideas that we have built up in a certain way, might have built up in a different way, and are still evolving. This is true even of the mathematical logic. The thing about critical thinking is I don't think you can define it in some nice way. I don't think you can say this is what it is, but I think you can point at examples of it. You may recall the story of Abraham Lincoln when he was a trial lawyer before he was a president, defending somebody from a murder charge. And one of the witnesses testified that he had seen the defendant on some moonlit night engaged in some bad activity. And Lincoln fetched an almanac and showed from the almanac the moon was not shining that night. That was critical thinking. Okay? Now, it's not necessarily on the level of what you will learn if you are studying propositional logic, but it's a pointer in that direction. I know in learning mathematics, in trying to take a person and turn him or her into a mathematician, one of the first things that you have to do is spend a lot of time teaching them to think in an extremely precise way, which is very different from the way that most people think, even about mathematics. But if you want them to start doing really significant mathematics and doing research, they have to learn to bring in things such as aesthetics, beauty, connections with the outside world. And these things get swirled together as intimately as the performance that you will see carried out by, let us say, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, who are engaged in very precise movements and yet combine it all into an absolutely beautiful performance. So I don't see these things as necessarily being separated or possibly even separable.
So the idea that spider web would go together with that kind of thinking. You have to, the proper thinking, meta thinking, has to combine mathematics, aesthetics, ethics, justice, fairness, values, common sense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So critical thinking probably is a deficient term because it just doesn't give you the sense of complexity and abstraction. So I stick with meta thinking.
Luis, you mentioned something. I think we talked about this, or you mentioned it months ago. When it comes to critical thinking, unless you've engaged and developed intuitiveness, what Mike was talking about, what Abraham Lincoln was doing was critical association. A farmer that knows to observe the sun and the moon and its location to basically know how to plant seeds or feed their animals, that's more of a critical association. If there's a critical, like there's also, you could using critical emotions, you're associating certain things and then you're going inwards. Where it comes to critical thinking, I think what people do is they play with numbers, an example, and they don't realize in that you're doing a lot of association. So you're developing an awareness by all the conditioning that's come in you, and you're finding out that some people know how to comprehend information. Other people just know how to gather information. And then other people just know intuitively. So I think what happens is you get a person that says, okay, Dominic, I'm a critical thinker. So then explain how the polarities of a car works. Positive and negative and grounding. And if you see that, then you can see the association with the sun and the moon and the earth. But when somebody says, I just want to be positive, I said, they're not actually doing critical thinking. They're actually limiting themselves. So now, again, critical thinking is a left hemisphere, it's a left hemisphere kind of way of thinking. And then no different, some people would like to do the opposite. They wanted to do their right hemisphere when it comes to being artistic. That's just the hemispheres of what we call the king and queen. That kingdom has to have an alignment of the king and queen, because if you don't, then the heart becomes the fool, the gesture to challenge you. It's like that wise person that usually comes in the gesture form. But privately, he will tell the king and the queen, you're both acting like idiots. But I know publicly I can't say that, because then you'll have to be the example. You have to use me as an example of authority. But behind closed doors, yeah, you can call me an idiot. So what happens with some people when they get into this philosophizing kind of thing is they don't realize they brought in their likes and dislikes. And unfortunately, when you philosophize, you're using the English language. It's limiting. It's like saying, I'm going to do healing with my voice, but meanwhile, you're using a meaningful language. So unless people understand how sounds and frequency works, what they're doing again is they're talking for the sake of talking. We all condition. Most of our condition is done in the womb, because if we were truly meant to read, we would have learned from the womb. That's conditioning.
How do sounds and frequencies work, Dom?
Well, when you have in the unknown called chaos, when it manifests itself in the material, that's called order. But what happens is there's different tones to them. So some people like to play the 432 opposed to 440. For some people, 432 brings value to them, even though there's numbers that gauges them. But some people, they're not presented to it. They benefit more in a 621 frequency. But because the music industry has limited itself to zeros and ones, blacks and whites, 440 or 432, number 9 opposed to number 8, which is great, but it would be nice to play frequency at 621. It's number 9 still.
So how does that work? I mean, at the very basics, what are the physics of that?
The physics on that would be
sounds and frequencies.
Okay. So cymatica plays it. So when people play cymatica, they play frequency, and it shows what it can do to materials such as water and what it can do to dust and all that kind of stuff. So within our bodies, we have liquids. We have blood and water. So when we actually when we talk with each other, we're actually giving ourselves sounds and frequency, and that's where it gets stored. So when they do cymatica, they're just seeing from observation how it shapeshifts, but they don't realize each of those properties have memories built inside of it. So, and the sound, think about an earthquake or a lightning and all that kind of stuff. There's sound in all of that. And in all of that, it's in the unknown and manifests itself in the known. So emotions are affected by sound. Hence,
Gotcha.
Baroque music, it shows the soul. So,
All right. Good. Well, that's
one last comment I'll put in.
You're gonna get
As our
kidnapped, but you can come back.
Canadian trucker remarked, what we want to do is